It was like I had a connection with this nun, like I needed to know more about her.
Lucrezia Vitsana was a nun at the convent of Santa Cristina.
Why was I so drawn to this story?
She was very creative and courageous.
Something compelled me.
She suffered a lot.
They were under siege by the Archbishop's police, ultimately threatened with excommunication by the Pope himself. She went mad.
The whole idea of this nun being a woman and a composer who wrote music that was ahead of her time, who had her music published, and having lived through what she did and managed to do what she did, to me seems like almost unbelievable.
What sets her apart from the other nuns in that city, and indeed from most nuns of her period, is that she studied music with such success that she became a composer, the only woman who had been bold enough to venture into print. This manuscript contained some pieces with slightly off-color texts, which wasn't my idea of what nuns would have been singing in the early 1620s, but it employs slightly unusual musical gestures, particularly in terms of clashes between the vocal part and the harmony, that seemed unusual for a woman who had entered the convent at the age of 8 and presumably wouldn't have known what was going on in the outside world. Obviously she must have, and so one of the intriguing possibilities to follow up was, how did she manage to compose this way?
She is an example for all women. For anybody, especially women who want to do anything in any field today, they can go out and do it.
Women's situations have definitely changed, and I think it's very hard for people to understand today what life was like for a woman then. It's I think when people hear, for example, that Lucrezia Vitsana went to the convent at age 8, they think this poor girl, she had no options in life, she had no freedom of choice. They don't necessarily realize that this may have been the best choice for her.
I had no idea who this woman was, and there was not very much at all to go on. No picture, no biographies, nothing except the book and Craig's analyzation of her music and what he felt she was.
It was originally going to be a more general book about musical life in the city of Bologna, but the convent of Santa Cristina turned out to be the most musically lively and rich environment for music, and of course it was also the home to the nun composer Lucrezia Vitsana, so it almost inevitably became the focus of the book. Also, the events that occurred there were so arresting that in a way I've said the nuns at Santa Cristina hijacked the narrative of the book.
I'm Harleen Stein. I'm a writer-producer. Right now I'm making a documentary about Lucrezia Vitsana. I read Craig Monson's book, Disembodied Voices, and was totally intrigued with this 17th century nun. I optioned Craig's book and began writing the screenplay, and I realized how little I knew about her. And I had to find out. And I decided to go to Bologna. I decided to just go with my friend Vince, and we took a camera. There was just the two of us, and we didn't know what we would find there. We had no idea.
There were perhaps half a dozen of the 20 convents in Bologna that appealed particularly to the women of the highest class. So at the time when Lucrezia Vitsana entered, about 50% of all the women came from the upper aristocracy in the city. The 100 first families of the city of Bologna. This meant that they were largely noble, that they had grown up with servants, and they expected to have servants when they came to the convent, and in fact they did.
Ma anche più ricchi, nel senso che hanno accumulato nel tempo una maggiore ricchezza.
Santa Cristina was a very wealthy convent.
In qualche modo erano più destinati, quindi proprio perché più ricchi, destinati alle famiglie più nobili della città.
And Santa Cristina recruited, received young women from the most noble and most wealthy centers of Bolognese society.
Discendendo appunto dall'ordine religioso.
The first day that we were there, we met Raffaella. Raffaella Lamberti is a member of Orlando. Orlando is a women's liberated organization which is international, which has its headquarters in Bologna, and Raffaella Lamberti is the president. She took us out to dinner and explained about all the interviews and people that she had lined up for us. I didn't know at that time how wonderful this was, because these turned out to be famous historians that I would never have known to even go think about. She got us into the convent, which is being reconstructed, and the bottom floor will be their women's center. The first interview that we actually did was with Gillian Anderson, and when she told me that it was wonderful that she was put into the convent, otherwise she'd have died in childbirth because marriage was a death sentence. I couldn't believe that.
In her case, and up to this century when birth control was possible in a fashion that actually allowed a woman to control her fertility, frequently the only way that a woman could get the opportunity to develop their talent or to remain alive. I mean, if they had children non-stop, which many of them did, they died in childbirth. That was, you know, it was to have children was a death sentence.
Of course, nowadays it could seem something really cruel, thinking about it. But as I know, at that time it was not so unusual to get for a woman to go in a convent for a little girl. It was the normal choice of life.
We saw Gianna Pomata, who is a famous historian of women's issues, especially medicine, how women were involved in medicine in 16th and 17th century Bologna.
A wonderful book written by a Venetian nun of the 17th century. Her name is Arcangela Tarabotti, and she wrote a book that is a very strong indictment against fathers who send their daughters to convent when they don't want to. And she called it tyranny. You know, she said this is a terrible thing.
We also interviewed Nicoletta Conti, who was a famous opera conductor.
That a woman could write just with this bad condition. I must say, she had to go to a convent in order to have the possibility of writing.
My take is that if she had not gone into the convent, she might very well not have gotten the opportunity to develop her talent at all. And she might not have lived very long. The accounts I've read of 18th century women whose uteruses were actually out of their bodies. They'd had so many children that and then this became infected and then they died. I mean, we just don't have equivalents to that today.
Women at that time were barely considered a human being. A woman has no soul. Woman was just a gift from the devil.
My mother's motto was, get married, have babies as soon as you can. Obviously, marry as rich a man as possible. And that isn't what I wanted. I wanted to be a singer. This morning, we went to the Vizzani, Palazzo Vizzani, and we filmed there. What a huge, beautiful place that must have been. And I know that really wasn't, that was her father's family. And and that they lived a little further in town, but still that's the family he came from.
Family ties. We know that she was from a very important family in Bologna. Her family home, the Palazzo Vizzani, is still extant, and she was from other important families. I think her mother was a Bombacci, which is also. These were major, powerful families in the city. Also, I think it's interesting to note that in many of the musical convents throughout Italy, it was not all the convents which were performing music, but it was the rich convents which was performing music, because it was the richer convents where the richer, more powerful families were putting their daughters and their nieces and their aunts and things that could afford to have musical instruction, that could afford to, that had the power to, what can I say, to have the rules bent.
You were moving to this place where it was going to be supposedly much easier to, get closer to God. And that's what some of them really wanted to do that. Then many others instead did not want to do that. They wanted to get married and to have a family, but their families didn't allow them to get married, mostly for economic reasons.
Most of these women wore makeup and jewelry and came with their servants and all of their belongings that were rather luxurious. Their cells were decorated with beautiful altars and pictures.
Well, yes, because they felt that since they had not chosen the religious life freely, they really shouldn't pay attention to the rules.
Because she already had 3 of her mother's sisters there as nuns, she would have been raised primarily by her aunts. One of her aunts also happened to be a proficient musician, was the convent organist. So it makes sense that when Lucrezia showed musical talent, her aunt would have developed it as much as possible. And we know that the convent even went to the extreme of secretly employing one of the prominent musicians from the city of Bologna as the music master at the convent. Now, this was against the rules of the episcopal hierarchy in Bologna, but they went ahead and did it because they thought that was what would be the best way to foster her talents.
I kept asking myself, why was I so drawn to this story? I started seeing strong similarities in both our lives. I had to find out more. It seems to me she might have been a very independent kind of person had she been allowed to live the life that she wanted to live, rather than being put in a convent. I was the same way. I had all these ideas, and I guess because I fell in love and decided that he was more talented than I was, and that my life should be dedicated to his needs, my life changed. She went into the convent and decided, I guess, that she had to do what she was told to in a way, and that is to become a nun, and her life was decided for her in that situation. When we saw the astrologer in Bologna, that's what she told me. She said, I had come to Italy to find out my secrets. And she was absolutely right.
Your secret, no? Like is Pluto, are in the sign of Cancer, the same sign of Lucrezia. Cancer is under the moon. The moon are lunatic.
They are what?
Lunatic.
Lunatic. Which is what?
In some mood, not really full, little bit more full. And she appeared to be very intensive intimacy in his
intensive,
deep feeling.
Intense, deep feelings.
Intense, deep feelings. Exactly.
Do I have that in my chart?
The same.
The same.
In the 9th house, that means that you will find out your secret from abroad.
Perhaps Lucrezia